Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The War Girls by V.S. Alexander. Narrated by Kelli Taker. Prologue to War. In their blackest dreams, none of them could have foreseen what the future held. August 1939 was like other summers, with heat that rose from the streets, late summer roses, and smoky pink and red sunsets that faded into night, except for conversations filled with dread and the rumors of war. Stefa and Janka had passed on Krokmalna Street in Warsaw countless times, but had never spoken. Stefa was a Jew and Janka a Catholic. The two did not mix readily. They knew each other by sight as neighbors, with little in common. They were aware, but oblivious, as distant as residents of the city and farmers in the Polish countryside. Stefa had been told little about what was happening in Nazi Germany because her father didn't want to upset her or the rest of the family, especially her mother. Most news about the war came from her impetuous younger brother. Janka's husband was nearly as silent, although she could tell that some part of him would welcome an impending war. "The Nazis will do what they have to do," he cautioned, telling her to be ready for a great invasion. They would be ready, he said, to take advantage of the war, the winner taking the spoils. Stefa's older sister, Hanna, had left Warsaw in January to live in London. Unable to bear the constraints of her traditional family, she had deserted them to live with her mother's sister and her husband. England was on edge, but Hanna tried to shun the forces that were moving in destructive patterns far beyond her control. She was happy to be free and living a life outside Warsaw. None of them could have known what was about to happen. Only Hitler knew. None of them could have known they would become the War Girls. Upper Silesia, after 8 p.m., August 31st, 1939. "Shoot him." The SS officer nodded and looked at the Pole, Franciszek Honiuk, who lay sprawled near the entrance to the radio station at Gliwice. Tall transmitting towers thrust into the sky on either side of the modest stone building, like pillars embellishing the entrance to a temple. One shot to the back of the head, and Franz, as they had come to call him, would be dispatched to the netherworld of God's choosing. In his drugged state, the Pole wouldn't know the difference. In the hours after Franz's arrest the day before, the SS men had grown to like him, banter with him, kid him about his Polish sympathies, despite being a German national. What a pity that Franz would end up being on the wrong side in the war. With one quick action of the trigger, it would be all over, and the world would learn how the Polish nationalists had attacked a German radio station and beaten the employees in order to spread their message of anti-German hate. This event would lead to the justifiable death of Franz at the hands of the German protectors. Before he fired his pistol, the officer had time to reflect upon the tactical blunders committed under Operation Himmler, the National Socialist excuse to annihilate Poland. "If there's the slightest provocation, I shall shatter Poland without warning into so many pieces that there will be nothing left to pick up," the Führer had said earlier in the month. But the operation had not gone smoothly. The station was only a transmitter relay post, not a radio station. The SS agitators couldn't find a microphone, and only an emergency channel was available for transmission of their short anti-German message. How many people would be listening? Not the hundreds of thousands the Führer had expected. Gliwice, a sleepy German town on a flat plain dotted with trees in the first blush of fall, would record, perhaps, the first death of the upcoming war. "Shoot him!" The command echoed in the SS man's head. Franz, still sedated, moaned, shifted his leg, and lifted his groggy head. His eyes fluttered and then closed again. The Nazi protector pulled the trigger. Franz's body jerked as the bullet entered his brain, blood pooling around the wound, then flowing down his face. The local police took photos of the body, but Berlin wasn't satisfied. One death wasn't good enough for propaganda purposes. Even a second body and more photographs failed to convince the Gestapo that enough had been done to persuade the German public that Poland must fall to the Nazi war machine. Wielonnia, Poland, 5:40 a.m., September 1st, 1939. Annoyed by the buzzing overhead, Tomasz pulled the wool blanket over him, turned, and snuggled into the warm cocoon of his bed. The room was dark, the solitary light bulb hanging from the ceiling switched off for the night. Sometime after midnight, he'd wet his fingers with spit and extinguish the wick of the small candle that he often lit to keep him company while he drifted off to sleep. The talk of war exchanged by his parents at supper had jangled his nerves and kept him awake. They whispered of a German battleship near Danzig, Nazi troops, and tanks amassed at the Polish border. Now, deep into the night, his parents slept in the room next to his on the second floor. When he was lonely, for at 11 years of age he had no brothers or sisters, he would stare at the picture of the Virgin that his mother had hung on the wall across from his bed, as a reminder to be a good boy full of devotion, piety, and dutiful works. Sin was for the wicked. Evil men and women would spend eternity in hell. However, God would look after and protect the devout. His mother had repeated this so often he could parrot her words, as if they were inscribed in one of his school books. The Virgin's eyes always seemed to follow him, no matter where he was in his room, especially if he was thinking of girls and their curious figures, so different from his. He often wondered if Mary's wounded heart, pierced by a sword and wrapped in white roses, pained her. Mostly she looked serene, swathed in her blue robes, the golden halo behind her head lighting her angelic face. The buzzing grew louder, filling his ears. He threw off the blanket and sat up, straining to see the Virgin on the dark green wall. A brilliant flash of yellow light lit her image, followed by a thunderous boom that shook the house. Plaster and billows of dust fell from the ceiling onto his head and bedclothes. His mother and father called out from their bedroom. What he heard wasn't normal. Their voices were high-pitched and frantic, laced with fear. His father, a craftsman, was never scared. Tomasz's father had never expressed such a feeling, not even when he chopped off the end of a finger with a hatchet. "It's only blood in the little meat," his father said, wrapping the bleeding stub with a handkerchief. He shoved off the blanket and planted his feet on the braided rug. More shock waves pounded the house, and somewhere from a distance not too far came the sound of rapid gunfire and screams. Wondering if what he was hearing and seeing was a nightmare, he imagined he would wake up in a sweat and be safe in bed, as he had many times before when he'd eaten too much chocolate torte for his own good. He sensed something bearing down upon him. The weight, the pressure slicing through the atmosphere in a monstrous wave. It zoomed over his head and exploded with a deafening roar, and the house seemed to lift from its foundation and fall back to earth with a thud. Everything in the room bounced into the air and then fell, including the picture of the Virgin, whose protective glass and wooden frame shattered to the floor. Tomasz found himself face down on the rug, covered in chunks of plaster and stone. Blood trickled down his right arm and leg, but he stretched, moving them. That was a good sign. "Mama! Tata!" They couldn't hear his voice over the planes and explosions. He pushed himself up from the floor and then realized the room was tilted at a crazy angle. Only his bed had kept him from rolling toward the window that looked out upon the roof. He crawled up the angled floor to the bedroom door, opened it, and screamed. The rest of the house had been blown apart. The stairs lay in a jumbled mass 4 meters below. Orange flames leapt up from what had been the kitchen, from his mother's now-buried stove. He looked left around the door to his parents' bedroom and saw only empty space. The sky, barely visible through the smoke and haze, lay black with a meager dusting of stars. He lurched toward the bed, fumbling over the splintered wood and stone, sliding over the mattress, which had come to rest near the wall near the window. Wrestling with the latch, he opened the frame, taking care not to cut his hand on the broken glass, and climbed out on the sloping roof. The drop from the eave to the village road, winding below in the semi-darkness, was a few meters. As he descended, he spotted the silvery black outlines of planes circling the town. To his right, the hospital burned, and bodies lay jumbled in the street, patients' gowns splattered with dark patches upon white cloth. Low on the horizon, but approaching fast, a needle-like shape spat fire from its wings. Tomasz covered his head and flattened himself against the stone tiles. The plane roared over him, and he heard the thunk-thunk-thunk of bullets whizzing past him, penetrating wherever they landed. He had never seen such a weapon of the air before. He and his father had watched one day as a Polish biplane cut through a nearly cloudless sky, but he never imagined that creations so fast and fierce could slice through the heavens. It was unwise to be on the roof. Tomasz slid down, his pajama top catching on one of the jagged tiles. Ripping the fabric free, grasping at anything to break his fall, he tumbled into the branches of a tree that had been shredded in half by the bomb, and gingerly lowered himself to the ground. The first haze of yellow crept up from the horizon, but the emerging light offered nothing to his eyes. He could see clearly from the fires burning around him. His home had been dissected from the force of the blast. The roof had collapsed on his parents' crumpled bedroom. The sudden shock of seeing the jumbled timbers and debris sent a wave of fear through his body. He called out again for his mother and father, but they didn't answer. "Tomasz, Tomasz, come inside! Get out of the open!" a neighbor yelled through a broken window across the street. Another explosion rocked his body so hard he thought his bones would slice like knives through his skin. The plane streaked over him, pulled up, and disappeared into a sky now growing lighter with the dawn. He ran in his bloody pajamas away from the town center, away from the bombs and the planes that strafed anyone in the streets, taking shelter in a grove of trees until night fell. Then he walked back to his home to find more destruction and the men and women of Wielonia mourning the dead. His neighbor told him that 200 townspeople had been killed by Nazi bombs during the day, and his parents were among them. He looked up at the stars and wept. Part 1. Chapter 1, September 1st, 1939. When the bombs fell near Krokmalna Street in Warsaw, Israel Majewski called for his family to take shelter under the heavy dining room table. He worried that his wife, Perla, who often succumbed to nerves, the news of war having already preyed upon her mind, might cry out and run into the street. Not a safe place to be as far as he was concerned. Aryan, his son, would do just the opposite and fly to the window to watch the bombers. "Quickly, under the table," Israel ordered, as the air raid sirens droned their rise and fall song. It won't protect us from Nazi bombs, Aryan said. As Israel suspected, his son, small for his 12 years, thin and lanky, his trousers cinched at the waist, his white shirt blossoming around him, bounded for the window. "Oh, God, why is this happening to us?" Perla said, shuffling around the table, massaging her temples, her fingers extending toward the kerchief that covered her black hair. "Where is Stefa? Where is that girl? And on Shabbos, they come to bomb us." "She's gone for a walk," Israel said, beckoning Aryan to step away from the window. Grinning, Aryan looked over his shoulder. "She's gone to see her boyfriend." Perla stopped and pointed at him. "Never dishonor your sister by saying such things. Stefa holds a place in this family as an observant girl. She obeys the laws." Israel bent to his own curiosity, a trait he had instilled in his son, and stood in front of the window. The clouds hung low and gray over Warsaw, with occasional patches of blue sky that succumbed to the overcast as quickly as they appeared. The normally busy street had come to a standstill. Pedestrians stopped with their eyes to the sky, coachmen's heads tilted upwards. Automobile drivers had pulled over, doors open, their faces peering out the side window. Neighbors from the many tenement buildings that stretched down Krokmalna stood on their balconies or took refuge behind the fragile protection of glass. Aryan bolted toward the small balcony that jutted out from their apartment on the top floor of their building. Israel caught him by the arm and pushed him toward the table. "Go," Israel said. "I will see what's happening." "Not fair," Aryan said, as his mother pulled him under the table with her. "Life is filled with injustice," Israel shouted back while opening the double doors to the balcony. He stepped outside and put his hands on the wrought iron railing that rose up to his waist. Above him, the stone-carved head of a smiling man looked down at him from the decorative turret of the 50-year-old structure. A warm breeze struck him, ruffling the buttoned edges of his shirt and nearly lifting his yarmulke from his head. He could hardly believe what he was seeing and hearing. Bombs were falling on the city. The explosions seemed far away, almost dreamlike, and the faint whir of the bombers sounded more like bees buzzing over spring flowers. But even he, an untrained civilian, could tell that the cloudy conditions had inhibited a prolonged bombing. Poland should get down on its knees and beseech God for rain. Days and days of water turning the roads to mud, halting the tanks, the artillery, and Hitler's Wehrmacht, shielding the city from the bombers. The Nazis were well aware of their military limitations on this day, he thought. If September was clear and warm and the Polish army was ineffective at repulsing a German advance, the month ahead would be hellish. Hitler had made it clear that he intended to crush Poland. Rain or no rain, the family had better be prepared. He hated to think about such an unimaginable situation. An educated, analytical mind torn from its focus on family and tradition. Across the Vistula River, to the east, a blast vibrated through the air, followed by a rising column of grayish-white smoke. He'd not seen the black speck of a falling bomb. The unannounced, invisible, utterly random hand of death scared him and shook his confidence. However, he knew he needed to be strong for the sake of his son and wife. He left the balcony and returned to the table to find Perla, her face flushed and her eyes red with tears, sitting beneath it, across from Aryan, both huddled against its heavy oak legs. Their faces were barely visible through the airy handiwork of the lace tablecloth. Israel got down on his knees and slid between them. "I'm worried about Stefa," Perla said, blowing her nose into a white handkerchief. "She'll be fine and home soon, I'm sure," Israel said. "The bombing is erratic, not much of a threat." "Daniel will protect her," Aryan smiled and leaned back against the leg that supported his back. "You know this Daniel better than we do, child that you are," Perla said. "I must talk to Stefa. She's much too interested in this man, more than she should be. Her husband should come from our arrangement or not at all." She winced, apparently thinking of her daughter, who had left Warsaw for the same reason. Another bomb fell close to Krokmolna, and a shudder rippled through the building. "Who can think of marriage at a time like this?" she asked. "I'm glad at least that Hanna is safe in London, despite how it ripped my heart out to see her go. Now I worry that she'll have nothing to come home to." Israel pretended not to hear his wife, wanting to scold her for even imagining the worst. But Perla had always been sensitive. He knew that from the moment he met her, when she had dared not even steal a look at him. She was prettier than he'd expected when they gathered at her family's farm outside Warsaw, with her skin reddened by working outside, her body lean and taut. Her shy face caught the shadows from the ash trees circling the house, along with a play of sunlight flashing on her body. Despite Perla's display of modesty in this arranged marriage, he knew that she and her family were proud of him. A mashgiach, an educated man who supervised the kashrus of a Warsaw restaurant. A man who gave blessings to the kosher slaughter of animals. His profession and his wife's homemaking skills had allowed them to build a family with only a few tragedies along the way. The stillbirth of a girl between Stefa and Aryan, and the departure of his eldest daughter, Hanna, who had left 9 months ago to stay with relatives in London and never returned. But he didn't want to concern himself with Hanna as the bombs were falling in Warsaw, other than to think that she was safe as war began. His eldest daughter had ripped out his heart as well, and she had not done it as neatly as he would have done it when he was a younger man, a shochet, a butcher, at the slaughterhouse. "This is silly," Aryan said. "If a bomb hits, it will go through the roof and blow up the building. We might as well get out from under this table." "Hush," Perla said, shaking her head. "The young have no fear of death." Aryan sighed. Israel lowered his head and twisted his legs under his torso. Sitting with his neck arched against the bottom of the table was uncomfortable, but at least it offered some protection should the ceiling crack. After 10 minutes of agony, he was about to agree with his son's suggestion to leave their shelter when the apartment door opened. Stefa had returned, her sturdy legs showing beneath her calf-length gray dress, her feet in the low-heeled black shoes that Perla had purchased for her. Aryan held a finger to his lips. Stefa called out for her parents, her voice rising in panic with each cry. When she stepped too close to the table, Aryan reached from under the lace and grabbed his sister's ankle. Stefa screamed, hopping away in terror. Laughing, Aryan slid from under the table across the polished oak floor as his sister sank into a chair. "Got you!" Israel and Perla poked their heads out from under the table. "You little brat!" Stefa fanned her red cheeks with her hands, a sprig of light brown hair protruding from her kerchief, fluttering in the breeze. "I'll kill you someday!" She stopped, placing her hands over her mouth, thinking better of her words as the bombs continued to fall. Israel, his body cramping, crawled out from under the table. He stood up and checked for dust on his trousers and jacket, but found nothing, a testament to his wife's immaculate housekeeping. Perla followed her husband, apprehensively inspecting the ceiling before chastising Stefa. "At last you're home. I was worried sick. I feel safer outside than I do in here," Stefa said. "On the street I can run away." "You could never run as fast as Hanna." Aryan rested his head on his intertwined hands, his body stretched across the floor. "How was Daniel?" Stefa sniffed. "I took a walk, and even if I did see him, it would be no business of yours." "We must talk about this man," Perla said. Stefa held up her hand. "I know what you're going to say, Mother, about arrangements and marriage rights, and what a woman must do for her husband." She looked down into her lap. "But I'm not ready for marriage, and now the war seems to have begun." "Your mother and I will make the arrangements," Israel said, judging his daughter's discomfort. Stefa's words led to his own uneasiness, because they reminded him of Hanna and her self-imposed break from the family. 2 daughters of like mind would bring him no comfort. She stared at him, her hazel eyes flashing. "I did see Daniel today, from across the street. Me on one side, he on the other. He thinks I'm beautiful, and I think he's handsome, and we like each other. Doesn't that count for something?" Israel turned and looked across the tops of the buildings that lined Krokmalna and the gray sky above. The family should remain firm and strong. Did it matter anymore? The war was real now. He could feel it in his bones, in his soul, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. He had little confidence that the Polish army could match the German soldiers. Hitler had stopped his lies about amassing a Nazi war machine. The bombers, fighter planes, the millions of troops and armaments that he had ordered, as the world offered him appeasement gifts, but still prayed that Germany would come to its senses. Such thinking had been swiftly destroyed in one day, on the eve of Shabbos. He had looked forward to eating the Sabbath meal, had always looked forward to Friday's sunset and Perla's lighting of the candles on the sideboard. He could smell the meal that she had already prepared, the baked chicken, the potatoes, the summer squash that would be served this evening, the cholent that would simmer overnight to be eaten at lunch on Saturday after synagogue. Israel looked back at his daughter, still sitting in the chair. She, 16 years old, was the second child after Hanna. More pliable than her older sister, but used to getting what she wanted. She had a temper and could be stubborn, but she had also used her fair skin and modesty to charm as well. A mystery to him at times, as if she had been born to another mother and father. Stefa had Perla's softer, rounder face, while Hanna favored his longer facial structure and angular lines. In a few hours, it would be sunset, and time for blessing, prayers, and songs. The drone of the bombers seemed to have drifted away, thwarted by the cloudy weather. He wondered what Stefa saw, perhaps loved, in this man, Daniel. He wouldn't say anything to Perla yet, but the Nazis had changed everything, including love. Would happiness last in the years ahead? Would the fighting be over quickly? Arranged marriages might be a thing of the past, like peace, in a future too terrible to behold. Maybe the time had come to be flexible in the face of disaster. "Get up," he told Aryan, who was still sprawled at his sister's feet. "Let's look out on Warsaw. See what we can before the world." He took in the faces of his wife and children, and silently prayed for God to save them from a world consumed by war, wondering if his prayer would work. The bombs faded, and the afternoon grew long, darkening the clouds and her spirit. Perla had a few moments alone in the bedroom before sunset, and she used the time to soothe her nerves and still her shaking hands. She sat on her bed and grasped them firmly in her lap, aware that the flesh had become more fragile, the first faint brown spots showing irregularly between her wrist and fingers, knowing that at 38 years of age, these minor distractions would only get worse. The only luxury she afforded herself was a tin of petroleum jelly, which she applied lightly twice a week to keep her hands smooth. Stefa and Hanna, when they were younger, were fascinated by this routine. Her younger daughter had taken after her, secretly buying a jar of creme cosmeticzny, face cream. Perla had found the white porcelain container.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?